The old black Labrador wouldn't stop circling the same corner of the locked boathouse, and every time he did, the sound beneath his paws changed. Not much, just enough. Frost covered the dock planks that morning. Harlow pressed both front paws against the rotting wood and let out one slow breath through his nose. Not a bark. Something quieter than that. The kind of sound that meant he had already decided something, even if the man beside him hadn't caught up yet. Owen Beckett stood a few feet back with his hands in the pockets of a canvas jacket that had seen too many winters. 67 years old, one duffel bag, one government-issue sleeping mat rolled under his arm. Harlow. The dog looked back at him once, then returned to the corner. The wind off Georgian Bay came in sideways that November morning, carrying the smell of lake water, diesel, and the particular cold that settles into your bones before the ice does. The boathouse auction had drawn maybe 30 people, most of them contractors from Penetanguishene, a few scrap dealers from Midland, and one property developer who kept checking his phone and didn't bother hiding his impatience. Nobody had come for the boathouse itself. It was old, cedar-sided, roof soft in two places, sitting at the end of a disconnected dock on a strip of crown land the county had been trying to offload for 6 years. The auctioneer was a thin man named Gerald who wore a vest in November and spoke faster than the cold should have allowed. Last item of the morning. He gestured toward the boathouse without looking at it. Structure and dock access rights. County deed transfer pending. Minimum opening bid is $25. A few people laughed. One of the contractors said something to the man beside him. The developer clicked his phone off and walked toward his car. Nobody raised a hand. The wind pushed in off the bay. Harlow shifted his weight. Owen didn't plan to bid. He wasn't even sure why he had come. 3 nights earlier, he had slept in the cab of a stranger's truck, parked outside a Legion Hall in Barrie, with permission but without dignity. The night before that he had spent in an emergency shelter that didn't allow dogs. He had chosen the truck. He looked at the boathouse. The cedar siding had gone silver with age. One window was cracked along the bottom corner. The dock it sat on jutted out crookedly into the gray water, as if the whole thing had been listing slowly to one side for years and had simply decided to stop fighting it. It reminded him of something. He couldn't name it exactly. The feeling, maybe. The particular shape of a thing that had been useful once and then left behind. $25. Owen heard his own voice before he finished deciding. Gerald pointed at him. 25. Do I hear 30? Nobody answered. Sold. The sound of the gavel carried across the water. A couple of contractors glanced at Owen, the way people glance at something that surprises them slightly, but not enough to change anything. The developer's car had already left. Owen counted out the money from a fold of bills he kept in the inner pocket of his jacket. The last of what he had. Gerald handed him a temporary use receipt, not a full deed that would take weeks, and looked at the Labrador sitting beside Owen's feet. That your dog? Yes. He's calm. He always is, Owen said. That's not the same as being fine. Gerald nodded as if that made sense, which Owen appreciated. By the time the other buyers had cleared out, Owen and Harlow were alone on the dock. The boathouse lock was old and rusted, a padlock the size of a fist that had been painted over at some point and never repainted again. Owen didn't have a way to open it. Not yet. But the overhang above the side door was deep enough to block the wind, and the dock planks were solid enough to sleep on if he unrolled the mat and stayed close to the wall. He sat down, opened his pack, found half a granola bar and a wrapped cheese slice. He broke the granola bar in two and held out half to Harlow. The dog took it carefully from his hand, chewed once, then set the larger piece back down in front of Owen's boot. Owen stared at it, then at the dog. You always do that. Harlow's tail moved against the dock. Twice, the first real laugh Owen had managed in weeks came and went before he could catch it. Darkness settled early over the bay. The water went from gray to black. Somewhere across the channel, a buoy light blinked in a slow, steady rhythm. Owen lay on the sleeping mat with his back against the boathouse wall. Harlow pressed against his side. The cold was serious but not yet dangerous. Ontario November cold had a way of announcing itself early and then waiting. He closed his eyes. A transport truck groaned somewhere on the highway behind the tree line. The sound rolled across the water, low and heavy. For a half-second he was back in Kandahar, night convoy, dust and diesel, and the particular silence that preceded everything you didn't want to happen. His hand moved toward a sidearm that had not been there in 9 years. Then Harlow pressed his head against Owen's ribs, warm, still, present. Owen exhaled. The hand relaxed. "You remember too," he said quietly. The dog didn't answer. He didn't need to. They didn't sleep much that first night. Around 2 in the morning, Harlow stood suddenly, ears forward facing the water. Owen sat up without thinking. Old instinct. No nightmare, just attention. He scanned the dock, the shoreline, the gap between the boathouse and the tree line. Nothing moved, only water and wind. After a few minutes, Harlow lay back down. Owen watched him settle and thought about what his daughter had said. 3 months ago, in the kitchen of the house, Owen had built himself over 14 years on a property outside Collingwood. She had said, with the careful voice people use when they have already decided something, that she was worried about him. He had said he was fine. She had said the property taxes were becoming a problem. He had said he'd handle it. Her husband, a man named Philip who wore fleece vests indoors and spoke about real estate the way other men spoke about sport, had slid a folder across the kitchen table. Inside were documents Owen recognized before he finished reading the first page. He had put his son-in-law's name on the deed 3 years earlier, after his wife passed. After his daughter had suggested it made sense for estate purposes, for protection, for the future. He had trusted her. That was the word that kept coming back. Trusted. The house sold in 19 days. Owen was given 2 weeks to clear his belongings. Philip had arranged movers. The movers had come on a Thursday. Harlow had stood at the end of the driveway and watched them load the furniture without making a sound. The dog understood, Owen thought, more than most people gave him credit for. His daughter had cried when he left. He believed her. That didn't change much. The morning after the auction was clear and cold. Owen walked to the hardware store in town and found a man who looked at the padlock photograph on his phone and sold him a used bolt cutter for $12 he didn't have yet. He paid with the understanding that he would return. The man, whose name was Ed and who had a blue heeler sleeping under the counter, looked at Harlow and said, "Sure, take it." The lock gave on the 3rd try. The boathouse door swung inward. Cool, dark air moved past them. The smell of old wood and lake water and something else Owen couldn't name, something dry and preserved. Harlow walked in ahead of him. The interior was larger than Owen expected, high ceiling. A boat slip ran down the center, the water below it dark and still. Along the walls, wooden shelving held old equipment. Life rings, rope coils, a rusted outboard engine bracket, a tarp folded neatly in one corner, which surprised him. Everything else had settled into decades of dust, but the tarp had been folded. He noted it, filed it away. Harlow wasn't interested in any of it. The dog moved past the shelving, past the boat slip, past the rusted bracket, and stopped at the far rear wall. He stood there without barking, without scratching, without doing anything dramatic, just stood. Owen crossed the boathouse and crouched beside him. The wall looked like every other wall. Old cedar planking, darkened with age, slightly warped near the floor. "What is it?" Harlow pressed his nose to the base of the wall, one slow exhale. Owen looked at the floor where it met the wall. The gap was slightly different on this section. Not visibly, but if you were paying attention, the way the planking met the baseboard was off. A little too clean, a little too intentional. He stood and looked around the boathouse, then back at the dog. Harlow looked at him with amber eyes. Patient, certain. Owen thought about Afghanistan, about the particular expression Harlow had worn years ago during compound sweeps. The dog never wasted that expression on nothing. He filed it under, not nothing. He spent the first week surviving. November on Georgian Bay did not negotiate. Owen found day labor through the town bulletin board, splitting wood for a retired teacher named Bev, who paid cash and asked no questions. and left coffee on the porch railing when he arrived in the mornings. He spent 3 days helping a farmer named Cord move equipment before the ground froze solid. The money he earned went to food, a small propane heater, and a sleeping bag rated for lower temperatures than the one he'd arrived with. Harlow patrolled the boathouse at night, not anxiously, methodically, the way he had always worked. Every morning, without fail, the dog returned to the rear wall. Sometimes he sat in front of it. Sometimes he lay down. Once he placed both paws flat against the baseboard and held them there for almost a full minute before Owen called him away. 3 days after moving in, Owen dropped a wrench near the center of the boathouse floor. The sound was solid, ordinary. He moved to the rear wall and dropped it again. The sound changed, slightly hollow, slightly deeper, the way sound changes when there is space beneath a surface that appears solid. Harlow immediately sat up and looked at him. Owen crouched, ran his hand along the baseboard, found one section that moved almost imperceptibly, under pressure, not a wall, a panel. He sat back on his heels in the cold boathouse and listened to the water moving under the boat slip. Harlow pressed against his arm. Something was hidden here, something deliberate, something that had been waiting, behind a wall that looked like every other wall for longer than Owen had been struggling. He didn't open it that night. He needed tools he didn't have yet, and he needed to think. The propane heater glowed orange in the dark. Outside, snow had started, quiet and serious, the first real accumulation of the season. Owen sat with his back against the wooden wall, a few feet from whatever waited on the other side, and for the first time since leaving Collingwood, he didn't think about the house. He thought about what might have been put here and why. The answer was 6 days coming. A woman named June Abernathy ran the Historical Society out of a converted storefront on Main Street. Owen went to her not with a plan, but because Bev, the retired teacher, had mentioned, over coffee on the porch, that June knew every structure in the county that predated 1970. June was 71, sharp in the way that certain people get sharp after decades of being underestimated. And she looked at Owen for a long moment before she said anything. "You're the man who bought the Garnet Boathouse. News travels here. It always did." She folded her hands on the counter. "That property has been in dispute since 1987. 3 different owners tried to develop it and ran into deed complications every time. Why?" She tilted her head slightly. "Because nobody could ever establish a clean chain of ownership." She paused. "The original builder died without a clear will. Her family never came forward, June nodded. "Dorothy Garnet. She built that boathouse herself in 1951. She paused again. "She was a draftsman. Before that, she was a technical officer with the Royal Canadian Air Force." Owen looked at her. "She flew in the war?" June shook her head. "She designed what flew in the war. She corrected a sentence the way someone corrects a thing that matters. She was part of a unit that worked on aircraft specifications, performance calculations, load tolerances, advanced engineering for the time. For any time, really." Owen thought about the folded tarp in the corner, the too clean gap at the baseboard, someone who knew how to build things precisely. What happened to her? June was quiet for a moment. She came back from the war, built the boathouse, and mostly disappeared from the record. Nobody documented her properly. She never married. No children that anyone registered. She died in 1971 and left the property to a nephew who moved to British Columbia and eventually stopped paying taxes on it. June looked past Owen toward the window. She deserved better than that. Owen drove back to the boathouse in the borrowed truck of the farmer Cord, who had lent it without explanation, when Owen mentioned he needed to move some materials. He pried the panel open that evening. Behind it was a dry cavity, roughly 2 feet deep, running the length of the rear wall. Someone had lined it with oilcloth at some point. Inside, wrapped in the same cloth, were flat wooden cases, thin, wide, the kind built for storing documents flat, without folding. Harlow sat beside Owen and watched him open the first case. Inside were technical drawings, detailed, precise, executed in pencil and ink. Aircraft schematics, notations in a clear, careful hand, Performance calculations, load tolerances. In the margins, smaller notes, questions, revisions. The kind of thinking that happens when someone is solving a problem in real time. Each drawing was signed in the lower right corner. D. Garnett, ArcCF Technical Division, 1943-1945. Owen sat on the boathouse floor in the lamplight, turning pages he was almost afraid to touch. This was not forgotten equipment. This was not accidental storage. Someone had wrapped these carefully in oilcloth, placed them behind a precisely constructed panel, and sealed them against decades of lake weather. Dorothy Garnett had hidden her own work, and she had built the hiding place to last. The next morning, Owen walked back to June Abernathy. He brought one drawing, wrapped in a clean cloth. He set it on the counter in front of her without a word. June opened it, looked at it. Her hands went still. She looked up at Owen. "There are more," he said. The pace of things changed after that. June contacted a colleague at a university in Ottawa. The colleague came within a week, a tall, quiet man named Professor Ashby, who specialized in wartime aviation engineering, and who spent 3 hours in the boathouse without once asking to use the bathroom or take a break for lunch. When he finally looked up from the last drawing, his expression was the careful kind people wear when they do not want to overstate something they are certain is understated. "Do you understand what you have here?" Owen shook his head. Ashby set the drawing down gently. Dorothy Garnett filed 3 technical revisions with her commanding officer in 1944. He paused. Those revisions are credited in official RKAF records to a senior officer named Beaumont, who retired in 1955 with a full commendation. Owen waited. "None of these drawings," Ashby continued, "appear anywhere in the official record." He looked around the boathouse. She kept the originals. She kept all of it. Outside, the snow had stopped. The bay was gray and still. "She knew," Owen said. Ashby nodded. She knew exactly what she was doing. The nights grew colder. Owen slept in the boathouse, with the propane heater turned low, and Harlow close against his side. He had learned to stop fighting the flashbacks and simply let them pass through. Harlow had learned to press close when they arrived, warm and steady, until the sound or the smell or the particular quality of darkness that triggered them had moved on. Some nights it took 2 minutes, some nights longer. The dog never seemed to mind. One Tuesday in late November, a truck Owen didn't recognize idled at the end of the public access road near the dock, dark-colored. Engine running but not going anywhere. Owen noticed it from the boathouse window. He didn't react visibly. He moved away from the glass and noted the angle, the sight line, the exit points. Old habits. The truck left after 20 minutes. The next morning, a business card had been wedged into the gap of the side door. A property development company out of Toronto. An offer to purchase. Below the printed text, someone had written by hand, in the margin, "The county deed transfer isn't final yet. We can make this easier for everyone." Owen turned the card over. Blank. He put it in the wood stove. That evening he mentioned it to Cord, who came by occasionally with firewood and the particular company of a man who didn't require conversation. Cord looked at the stove where the card had gone, then at Owen, then at Harlow. "You know who runs that outfit?" "No." Cord scratched the back of his neck. "Guy named Presley. Buys distressed properties before the deed clears. Not illegal exactly." He paused. "But not the kind of thing that goes well if you let it." Owen said nothing. Cord looked at the hidden panel, which Owen had not resealed. The cases were still visible inside. He looked at them the way a man looks at something he has decided not to ask about yet. He left more firewood than usual when he went. The second visit came 11 days later. Owen was not asleep. He had not been fully asleep since the business card. He lay on the sleeping bag with his eyes closed and his attention on the door. Harlow heard it first. The dog rose without sound. No bark, no growl, just a posture that meant contact. The side door handle moved. Owen was on his feet before it moved a second time. He hit the interior light switch and shoved the door open. A man stumbled backward on the dock, younger than Owen expected. Heavy jacket, toque pulled low. In his hand was a pry bar he'd grabbed from somewhere. Harlow came through the door behind Owen, not barking, moving. The man swung the pry bar in a wide arc, panicked, not skilled. It caught Harlow across the left shoulder. The dog went down on one knee, with a sound Owen had never heard from him before. A short, compressed sound that was worse than a yelp. Then Harlow stood back up, put himself between Owen and the man. Still, the man ran. Owen heard him crash through the brush at the end of the dock, and then the sound of a vehicle accelerating on gravel. Owen dropped to his knees in the cold. Harlow stood over him, facing the direction the man had gone. Blood darkened the fur at his shoulder. He was breathing hard. Owen put both hands on the dog's face. "Look at me." Harlow looked at him, eyes steady, ears still working. "You're okay," Owen said. "You're okay." He was not sure which of them he was telling. The nearest emergency vet was 40 minutes south. Owen drove there in Cord's truck before midnight, which he borrowed by calling Cord's landline, and saying, "I need the truck," no explanation. And Cord had said, "The keys are in the visor. Don't worry about gas." The vet was a woman in her 40s who looked at Harlow with the focused calm of someone who had seen injured working dogs before and understood what they were. She examined the shoulder carefully. No fracture. Deep muscle bruising. Possible minor tearing. She looked up at Owen. He protected something. Yes. She looked back at Harlow. "You'll need to keep him still for 2 weeks. He won't like it." Owen looked at the dog. "No, he won't." They drove back through the dark Ontario countryside, with Harlow lying carefully across the passenger seat, his head resting on Owen's thigh. Owen kept one hand on the dog's back the whole drive. By December, the story had moved beyond the boathouse. Professor Ashby brought 2 colleagues. June Abernathy contacted the Canadian War Museum in Ottawa. A journalist from the CBC drove up from Toronto and spent a full day with the drawings. After signing a document Ashby's university had prepared, and went back to write a piece that ran on a Tuesday, and was shared widely enough that June called Owen that evening, simply to say, "It's happening." Dorothy Garnett's name appeared in print for the first time in decades, then in a university journal, then in a museum press release that used the words "significant archival discovery." Owen read each piece once, then set it aside. The work mattered. He knew that, but the feeling he came back to, in the quiet of the boathouse after the researchers had gone, was something simpler. She had built the hiding place to last. She had made sure the work survived. She had done everything correctly, and then she had waited. He understood that kind of waiting. Harlow's shoulder healed slowly. He developed a slight favoring of the left leg that the vet said might be permanent. Children who came to the boathouse in the weeks that followed, when June began organizing informal historical visits, always noticed the limp. They always asked. Owen always answered the same way. He earned it. In late January, on a gray afternoon with ice forming at the edges of the dock, Owen found the last case. It had been behind the others, pushed to the back of the cavity, smaller than the rest. Inside was not a drawing. It was a letter. 3 pages, handwritten on thin paper, folded carefully. He sat on the floor of the boathouse and read it. "To whoever this reaches, I have spent several years watching careful work disappear into other people's records. I understand now that I cannot change this while I am living in a position that makes protest impossible. What I can do is preserve the evidence. What I can do is make sure it survives me. I do not know who will find this. A surveyor, perhaps. A developer. Someone dismantling what I built because they want the land for something they consider more useful. If you are none of those things, if you are someone who found this by accident, or by persistence, or by the particular luck of a stubborn animal, then I want to say something directly. Being set aside is not the same as being worth nothing. I learned this late. I should have understood it sooner. The work survives because I chose to protect it, not because anyone helped me. I am not proud of that, exactly, but I am not ashamed of it either. Do something useful with what you found." D. Garnett Collingwood, Ontario, 1969. Owen read it twice. Then a third time, set it down on his knee. Harlow walked over and lay down at his feet, carefully favoring the left side. The limp was less pronounced than it had been a month ago. Still there, still visible. Outside, ice creaked against the dock pilings. The bay had gone white in both directions. The boathouse walls held the cold out with the same quiet stubbornness they had held it out for 70 years. Owen thought about the kitchen table in Collingwood, the folder pushed across it, the careful voice, the movers on a Thursday. He thought about Harlow standing at the end of the driveway, watching. He thought about a woman who had built a hiding place for her own work because she knew no one else would protect it. He folded the letter along its original creases and put it back in its case. That spring, his daughter came. She drove up alone, without Philip, and arrived on a Saturday morning when the ice on the bay had finally gone. Owen was splitting kindling beside the boathouse when he heard her car. She looked at the boathouse. At the new sign June had organized, modest, wooden, with Dorothy Garnett's name and dates. At the visitors moving along the dock. At the dog lying in a patch of sun near the door. Then she looked at her father. Her face had something in it that was not the careful expression she had worn in the kitchen in Collingwood. It was older than that, and less managed. She said his name. Owen set down the splitting maul. He waited. She said she had read everything. The articles, the museum release, the CBC piece. She said she had read them all before calling, and she had tried to call twice and put the phone down without dialing. She said she was sorry. Owen looked at the bay. He said, "I know." She said it more quietly. "I mean it, Dad, I know," he said again. The water moved against the dock. Somewhere across the bay a loon called. Early for April, Owen thought, but they came back when they were ready. His daughter sat on an upturned crate near the boathouse door. Owen stood a few feet away. Harlow moved between them and lay down, equidistant, the way he had always positioned himself in uncertain spaces. She asked about the limp. Owen told her. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, in a voice that had most of the careful removed from it, "I told myself we were helping, that it was practical, that you couldn't manage alone. You were managing what was yours." He said it. Without heat, without accusation. She didn't answer because there wasn't one. What they built that afternoon was not reconciliation. It was something earlier than that. A beginning that knew its own limits. Owen had learned in the past year not to trust quickly. Harlow had not forgotten who had been there during the worst nights, and who had not. But she had come, without Philip, without a folder or a plan. That counted for something. That evening, after she had gone, Owen carried a folding chair outside and set it at the end of the dock. Harlow settled beside him on the boards, the left leg stretched forward at ease. The bay caught the last light and held it. The boathouse behind them, Dorothy Garnett's name on the sign. The visitors gone. The drawing safe inside glass cases. The letter archived in Ottawa. The day cooled. The loon called again, farther out. Owen leaned back in the chair. The water moved in its slow, unhurried way. Harlow put his head down on his paws and watched the tree line across the channel. No nightmares came that night. The cold that had once felt like threat felt like weather now. Just weather. Just November becoming something else. Owen closed his eyes, not because sleep demanded it, but because he chose to. The bay settled. The boathouse held. And for the first time, in longer than he wanted to count, the silence around them felt like something that belonged to them.